The sleek black Maserati looked painfully out of place as it rumbled down Main Street of Meadowbrook, drawing curious stares from locals who rarely saw vehicles worth more than their mortgages cruising through their modest town. Behind the wheel, Thomas Fletcher gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with tension as he took in the unchanged storefronts and familiar landmarks of his hometown. 10 years ago, he'd left Meadowbrook with nothing but ambition and a business degree. He'd sworn never to return until he was somebody. Well, he'd become somebody all right, the founder and former CEO of Fletcher Tech, a software company that had skyrocketed to a 9-figure valuation before spectacularly imploding just 3 months ago. Thomas parked his car in front of the Meadowbrook Inn, the only hotel in town. He stepped out, straightening his tailored suit, a habit he couldn't shake even though there was no one to impress here. The spring air smelled of freshly cut grass and lilacs, so different from the sterile air-conditioned atmosphere of his Manhattan penthouse. "Tommy Fletcher, is that really you?" Thomas turned to see Mrs. Hanson, his former high school English teacher, staring at him with wide eyes. She looked older, her hair completely gray now, but her smile was exactly the same. "Mrs. Hanson," he said, forcing a smile, "it's good to see you." "My goodness, look at you, all grown up and fancy. I hear you've made quite a name for yourself out in the big city." News traveled slowly to Meadowbrook, apparently. Thomas felt his chest tighten. "I did all right for a while. We're all so proud. Are you here visiting your father?" Thomas nodded, not correcting her assumption that this was just a visit rather than a retreat. "Yes, madam." "Thought it was time to come home for a bit." After exchanging pleasantries, Thomas escaped into the inn. The lobby was small but charming, with floral wallpaper and landscape paintings that had been hanging in the same spot since he was a kid. "I'd like a room, please," he told the middle-aged man at the reception desk. The man looked up, recognition flickering in his eyes. Thomas Fletcher, Frank's boy. Thomas suppressed a sigh. This was going to be a pattern, he realized. In Meadowbrook, population 5,862, he would always be Frank's boy first, regardless of what he accomplished or failed at in the outside world. "That's right," he said. "I need a room for a while." He hadn't decided how long he would stay, only that he couldn't face New York right now, not with the lawsuits, the press, the former employees who had trusted him with their livelihoods. After checking in, Thomas headed to his room, a modest space with a queen bed and outdated floral decor. He sat heavily on the edge of the bed and pulled out his phone. 3 missed calls from his lawyer, 2 from his ex-fiancée Vanessa, who had walked out when the company started to tank, and several notifications from financial news sites that he couldn't bear to read. He turned off the phone and tossed it aside. The next morning, Thomas decided to visit his father. Frank Fletcher still lived in the same small ranch house where Thomas had grown up. As Thomas pulled into the driveway, he saw his father in the front yard, pruning the rosebushes that had been his mother's pride and joy before she passed away 12 years ago. Frank straightened up when he heard the car, his weathered face breaking into a surprised smile. "Tommy. Is that you in that fancy car?" Thomas got out and was immediately enveloped in a bear hug. His father smelled the same, like Old Spice aftershave and coffee. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" Frank asked, pulling back to look at his son. "It was a spur-of-the-moment decision," Thomas said, which wasn't entirely untrue. The decision had been made the moment he'd seen his face splashed across the Wall Street Journal under the headline, "Fletcher Tech CEO steps down amid financial scandal." Frank ushered him inside, chattering about neighborhood gossip and local changes. The house was exactly as Thomas remembered it, modest, slightly cluttered, with the same furniture they'd had since he was in high school. "Coffee," Frank offered, "please." As Frank busied himself in the kitchen, Thomas wandered into the living room. Photos of him throughout the years lined the mantel. Thomas at his high school graduation, Thomas at college, Thomas in a magazine profile when Fletcher Tech had secured its first major round of funding. His chest tightened. His father had followed his career closely, proudly. What would he say when he learned the truth? "So," Frank said, handing Thomas a mug of coffee, "to what do I owe this surprise visit?" Business in the area? Thomas took a deep breath. Dad, my company's gone bankrupt. I've lost everything. Frank's expression shifted from surprise to concern. Everything? Well, not literally everything, Thomas admitted. I still have some savings, the car, a few investments that were separate from the company, but Fletch Tech is finished. I had to let everyone go, over 200 employees. The press is having a field day. I couldn't stay in New York anymore. Frank sat down heavily in his recliner. I'm sorry, son, that must have been hard. You're not disappointed? Thomas asked, surprised by his father's calm reaction. Disappointed? Tommy, companies fail all the time. That doesn't change who you are or what you've accomplished. Thomas felt a lump in his throat. He had expected judgment, disappointment, or at the very least, a barrage of questions about what had gone wrong. Instead, his father offered simple acceptance. It was more than he deserved. Thanks, Dad, he managed. So you're staying in town for a while, Thomas nodded. At the inn. I thought about asking to crash here, but nonsense. Your room is exactly as you left it. Come home, Tommy. That night, Thomas moved his things from the inn to his childhood bedroom. The twin bed was too small for his 6-foot frame, the sports trophies and science fair ribbons relics of another life, but there was something comforting about the familiar space. In the morning, he decided to venture into town for breakfast. The Bluebird Cafe had been a Meadowbrook institution since before he was born. As he pushed open the door, the bell above it jingled, and several patrons looked up. Thomas Fletcher, as I live and breathe, called out Betty, the 60-something waitress who had been serving pancakes at the Bluebird for as long as anyone could remember. Thomas forced a smile, nodding to a few familiar faces as he made his way to an empty booth by the window. He hadn't been back to Meadowbrook in over 3 years, not since a quick Christmas visit, and before that, it had been his mother's funeral. Yet people remembered him, greeted him warmly as if no time had passed. Coffee? Betty asked, appearing at his table. Please. And the breakfast special, if it's still the same. 2 eggs over easy, bacon, hash browns, and toast. Some things never change. Betty winked as she scribbled on her pad. As Thomas sipped his coffee, the bell above the door jingled again. He glanced up and felt his heart skip a beat. A woman had entered, her chestnut hair caught in a loose ponytail, her face fresh and makeup-free except for a touch of lip gloss. She was dressed simply in jeans and a light blue blouse, but there was something striking about her. It took him a moment to place her. Kylie James. The woman turned, her green eyes widening in recognition. Thomas Fletcher. Is that really you? Kylie James had been 2 years behind him in school, the younger sister of one of his classmates. She'd been pretty in a girl next door way back then, but the years had transformed her into a confident, beautiful woman. In the flesh, he said, standing as she approached his table. It's good to see you, Kylie. You too, what brings the big shot CEO back to our humble little town. Her smile was genuine, but Thomas flinched at the CEO reference. Just visiting my dad, he said vaguely. What about you? I thought you'd left Meadowbrook too. I did. Went to college in Boston, then worked in Chicago for a few years. But I came back 3 years ago to help my mom after my dad passed away. Ended up staying. I'm sorry about your father, Kylie nodded, her expression softening. Thanks, it's been tough, but we're managing. She gestured to the empty seat across from him. Mind if I join you? Unless you're meeting someone. No, please sit down. As Betty brought Thomas's breakfast and took Kylie's order, Thomas found himself relaxing for the first time in months. There was something about Kylie's easy manner and genuine interest that made him forget, momentarily, the disaster he'd left behind in New York. So tell me about your life in the big city, Kylie said, stirring sugar into her coffee. Is it as glamorous as we all imagine? Thomas hesitated. He could give her the glossy version, the penthouse, the parties, the prestige, but something about Kylie's open face made him want to be honest. It was, for a while, he admitted. But lately, things have been complicated. Kylie studied him, her green eyes perceptive. I heard about Fletch Tech. I'm sorry, Thomas, so she knew. Of course she did. In the age of social media and instant news, even small-town Meadowbrook wasn't isolated from the world's events. It's fine, he said automatically, then sighed. Actually, it's not fine, it's a mess. I built that company from nothing, and I watched it crumble in months. 200 people lost their jobs because of decisions I made. That's why I'm really here hiding out until the dust settles." Kylie reached across the table and squeezed his hand. The simple gesture of comfort nearly undid him. "Everyone fails sometimes, Thomas. What matters is what you do next." "And what if I don't know what to do next?" Kylie smiled. "Then you take a breath and you figure it out one day at a time, and in the meantime, you remember that there's more to life than business success." Their conversation flowed easily after that, moving from Thomas's business downfall to lighter topics. Kylie told him about her job teaching art at the local high school and about the small studio she'd opened downtown where she taught evening classes and sold her own paintings. "You should stop by sometime," she said as they finished their breakfast. "I'm doing a beginner's watercolor class tonight. You could join us." Thomas laughed. "I don't think I have a creative bone in my body." "Everyone can create something beautiful, Thomas. Sometimes they just need the right guidance." Kylie's smile was warm, inviting. 7 o'clock if you change your mind. It's on Elm Street where the old hardware store used to be." Thomas spent the rest of the day helping his father with yard work, something he hadn't done since high school. The physical labor was therapeutic, allowing him to focus on the simple task at hand rather than the complicated mess of his life. At 6:30, he found himself standing in the shower, debating whether to go to Kylie's art class. It seemed silly, childish even, to spend an evening painting watercolors when he should be strategizing his next career move, dealing with the lawsuits, rebuilding his reputation. But the thought of seeing Kylie again was strangely compelling. There had been something in her green eyes that spoke to him, a kindness and wisdom he desperately needed right now. At 6:55, Thomas pushed open the door to James' art studio, a small but bright space with large windows and walls covered in colorful paintings. Kylie stood at the front, arranging supplies on a table. She looked up when the bell above the door jingled, and her face lit up with a smile that made Thomas's heart race. "You came," she exclaimed, hurrying over. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I," Thomas admitted. "But I figured a little creative therapy couldn't hurt." The class was small, just 6 people, including Thomas. The others were a mix of ages, from a teenage girl to an elderly man. Thomas was relieved when no one made a fuss over his presence or mentioned Fletch Tech. Kylie was a natural teacher, patient and encouraging as she demonstrated techniques and moved around the room offering individual guidance. Thomas's initial attempts were clumsy, his mountain landscape looking more like a blob with smudges, but Kylie's gentle corrections helped him improve. "You're getting it," she said, standing beside him. Her hand covered his as she guided his brush in a sweeping motion across the paper. "See, it's all about letting go of control sometimes, allowing the water and paint to flow naturally." Thomas was acutely aware of her closeness, the light floral scent of her perfume, the warmth of her hand on his. It had been months since he'd felt this kind of connection with another person. After Vanessa left, he'd thrown himself into trying to save his company, shutting out everything and everyone else. After class, as the other students filed out, Kylie invited Thomas to stay for a cup of tea. "I want to show you something," she said, leading him to a back room that served as her private studio. The space was filled with canvases, some finished, others works in progress. Kylie pointed to a painting on the far wall, a landscape of rolling hills with a small town nestled in the valley, golden light illuminating the scene. "Do you recognize it?" Thomas moved closer. "It's the view from Lookout Point." "Yes, I painted this my first month back in Meadowbrook. I'd been so focused on getting away from this town my whole life that I never appreciated its beauty until I came back with fresh eyes." Thomas studied the painting, seeing Meadowbrook as Kylie saw it, not as a place to escape from, but as something beautiful in its own right. "It's amazing, Kylie." "You're really talented," she smiled, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "Thanks. Art has always been my escape, my way of processing the world. When I came back to Meadowbrook, I was in a bad place, grieving my dad, recovering from a bad breakup, feeling like a failure for returning to my hometown. Painting helped me see the beauty around me, even when everything else felt dark. Thomas nodded, understanding completely. I could use some of that perspective right now. Then keep coming to class, Kylie said simply. And maybe I can show you some of my favorite spots to paint around here. Sometimes seeing familiar places through a new lens can change everything. Over the next few weeks, Thomas fell into a routine, mornings at the Bluebird Cafe, often with Kylie joining him for breakfast. Afternoons helping his father with projects around the house or taking long walks through town, reacquainting himself with Meadowbrook. Evenings at Kylie's studio for classes or simply watching her work on her own paintings, the two of them talking for hours about everything and nothing. On Saturdays, true to her word, Kylie took him to her favorite painting spot's lookout point, the old covered bridge over Wilson Creek, the wildflower meadow behind the high school. Thomas was improving at watercolors, but he enjoyed these outings more for Kylie's company than for the art. Meanwhile, the business world moved on without him. The lawsuits were settled, the press found new scandals to focus on, and Thomas's lawyer assured him that while his reputation had taken a hit, there was nothing preventing him from starting over when he was ready. The question was, what did he want to start over with? 3 months into his stay in Meadowbrook, Thomas realized he was happier than he'd been in years. The constant pressure, the relentless drive for more growth, more funding, more success had been slowly crushing him. Here he had time to breathe, to think, to feel, and then there was Kylie. Beautiful, wise, grounded Kylie, who saw past his failures to the person underneath. They hadn't put a name to what was developing between them, but Thomas knew he was falling for her hard and fast. One evening, as they walked back from the covered bridge where they'd spent the afternoon painting, Thomas decided to take a risk. "Kylie," he said, stopping on the path, "would you have dinner with me tomorrow night, not as friends, not as teacher and student, but as a date?" Kylie's green eyes widened, and for a terrible moment, Thomas thought he'd misread the signals between them. Then she smiled, that radiant smile that never failed to make his heart race. "I thought you'd never ask," she said softly. Their first date was at Giovanni's, the only Italian restaurant in Meadowbrook. They sat in a corner booth, talking and laughing over pasta and wine. Thomas found himself telling Kylie things he'd never shared with anyone: his fears about returning to the business world, his doubts about whether he wanted that life back at all. "What would you do if you could do anything?" Kylie asked, twirling pasta on her fork. If money and expectations weren't factors, Thomas thought about it. "I'm not sure. The tech world is all I've known since college, but lately I've been thinking about teaching, maybe. Sharing what I've learned, both successes and failures, with young entrepreneurs." "You'd be a great teacher," Kylie said. "You have patience and insight. I've seen it in my classes." "What about you?" Thomas asked. "Is teaching art in Meadowbrook what you always wanted?" "It wasn't my plan," Kylie admitted. "I was going to be a full-time artist in Chicago, showing in galleries, living the bohemian life. But coming back here, it felt right somehow. I'm still creating, still sharing my passion for art, just in a different way than I imagined." As they shared tiramisu for dessert, their fingers brushed, and Thomas felt a jolt of electricity. It had been a long time since he'd felt this way about anyone, this mixture of comfort and excitement, safety and anticipation. When he drove her home, Thomas walked Kylie to her door, his heart pounding as if he were a teenager on his first date rather than a 34-year-old former CEO. "I had a wonderful time," Kylie said, looking up at him with those clear green eyes. "So did I," Thomas replied. "Can I see you again tomorrow?" Kylie laughed. "We already have plans tomorrow. Saturday painting at the lake, remember?" "Right, of course." Thomas smiled, suddenly feeling shy. "Kylie, she stepped closer, her hand resting lightly on his chest. "Yes." Instead of finishing his thought, Thomas leaned down and kissed her. Her lips were soft and warm, and she tasted like tiramisu and possibility. When they broke apart, they were both smiling. "Good night, Thomas," Kylie whispered, squeezing his hand before slipping inside. Thomas floated back to his car, feeling lighter than he had in years. The next few weeks were a blur of happiness. Thomas and Kylie were inseparable, discovering each other and rediscovering Meadowbrook together. They hiked through the nature preserve, attended the local summer festival, and spent quiet evenings on the porch of Kylie's small craftsman house, talking until the fireflies came out. One evening, as they sat on Kylie's porch swing, Thomas's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and saw it was Marcus Taylor, his former business partner at Fletcher Tech. "You should take it," Kylie encouraged, seeing his hesitation. Thomas nodded and answered the call, stepping into the front yard to talk. When he returned to the porch 10 minutes later, his expression was thoughtful. "Everything okay?" Kylie asked. Thomas sat back down beside her, taking her hand in his. "Marcus has a new venture. He wants me to come on board as a co-founder. It's a smaller concept than Fletcher Tech, more sustainable, focused on educational software for underserved communities." "That sounds perfect for you," Kylie said, but there was a note of sadness in her voice. "When would you move back to New York?" "That's the thing," Thomas said slowly. "I don't think I want to go back to New York," Kylie's eyes widened. "But your career, your life there, my career crashed and burned, remember?" Thomas gave a rueful smile. "And my life. Kylie, my life is better here than it ever was in New York. These past few months with you have shown me what really matters." "What are you saying, Thomas?" "I'm saying I love you, Kylie James, and I'm saying I think I can build something new here with you. Marcus's company can be run remotely. I could base myself here, travel when needed, but make Meadowbrook my home." Tears welled in Kylie's eyes. "You would do that, stay here for me." "Not just for you, though you're a big part of it," Thomas said honestly. "For myself too, I'm happier here. The pace, the community, the chance to build something meaningful without the constant pressure of the New York tech scene, it feels right." Kylie leaned forward and kissed him, a kiss full of hope and promise. "I love you too, Thomas. And if staying in Meadowbrook is what you want, then I'm the luckiest woman alive." Thomas pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. "I've been thinking about something else too. The old Morgan building downtown is for sale. It's a beautiful space with lots of natural light." "I've always loved that building," Kylie said. "What would you do with it?" "I was thinking it could be a community innovation hub. Part co-working space for remote workers and entrepreneurs, part classroom for business and technology education, part expanded art studio for you. A place where creativity and business intersect, where people can learn and grow without having to leave Meadowbrook." Kylie pulled back to look at him, her face alight with excitement. "You'd want to work together, if you're interested," Thomas said. "Your art studio is already successful, but with more space, you could expand your classes, host exhibitions, maybe bring in other artists for workshops." "I love it," Kylie breathed. "It's perfect, Thomas. Using your business experience to help Meadowbrook grow while still keeping its character and community spirit." 6 months later, Thomas stood in the newly renovated Morgan building, now called Create Space, watching as Meadowbrook residents filtered in for the grand opening. The first floor housed Kylie's expanded art studio and gallery, while the second floor contained modern co-working spaces, meeting rooms, and a classroom where Thomas would teach business fundamentals to local entrepreneurs. His partnership with Marcus was thriving, with Thomas managing the educational curriculum development remotely. He traveled to New York once a month for in-person meetings, but Meadowbrook was firmly home now. "Nervous?" Kylie asked, slipping her hand into his. She looked stunning in a teal dress that matched her eyes, her chestnut hair falling in waves around her shoulders. "A little," Thomas admitted. "It's a different kind of venture than I'm used to." "The best kind," Kylie said, squeezing his hand, "one that builds community instead of just profit." Thomas nodded, looking around at the space they'd created together. It was beautiful, functional, and already becoming a centerpiece of Meadowbrook's small but growing business district. "I have something for you," he said, leading Kylie to a quiet corner. "A grand opening gift." He handed her a small wrapped package. Kylie opened it to find a velvet box. Her breath caught as she lifted the lid to reveal a vintage engagement ring, a single emerald surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my grandmother's," Thomas said softly. "My dad gave it to me last week when I told him what I was planning." Kylie James, coming back to Meadowbrook was the best failure I've ever experienced because it led me to you. Will you marry me? Tears spilled down Kylie's cheeks as she nodded. Yes, Thomas, yes. As he slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss, Thomas heard applause. They turned to see the entire room watching, his father in the front, beaming with pride. Later that evening, after the celebrations had wound down and the last guests had left, Thomas and Kylie stood in the empty gallery, looking out at the lights of Main Street. Did you ever imagine we'd end up here? Kylie asked, her head resting on his shoulder, her engagement ring catching the light. Never, Thomas admitted. When I drove into Meadowbrook 6 months ago, I thought I was at rock bottom. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. And now? Thomas turned to face her, cupping her face in his hands. Now I know I've found everything that matters. Success isn't about stock valuations or magazine covers. It's about building something meaningful, something that lasts. With you, I feel like the richest man in the world. Kylie smiled, that radiant smile that had first captured his heart in the Bluebird Cafe. We're going to build something amazing together, Thomas Fletcher. Just you wait and see. As they locked up Create Space and walked hand in hand down Main Street toward home, Thomas knew she was right. His business in New York had failed, but here in Meadowbrook, with Kylie by his side, he'd found success beyond anything he could have imagined, the success of coming home, of finding love, of building a life that was truly rich in all the ways that mattered. The millionaire had returned to his small hometown after his business failure and found not just love with an old classmate, but a new purpose, a new direction, and a happiness that no amount of money could ever buy. 2 years later, on a warm summer evening, Thomas and Kylie Fletcher sat on the porch of their renovated farmhouse on the outskirts of Meadowbrook, watching their 6-month-old daughter Harper play on a blanket in the yard. Create Space had become the heart of Meadowbrook's revitalization, with new businesses opening downtown and young families moving in, attracted by the combination of small town life and modern work opportunities. You ever miss it? Kylie asked, her fingers entwined with his. The excitement of New York, being a big-shot CEO, Thomas looked at his wife, still beautiful with her chestnut hair now cut into a practical bob, and at their daughter, who had Kylie's green eyes and his stubborn chin. Not for a second, he said truthfully. Everything I need is right here.